I don't want no oil, a spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes! Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus. Good evening, Bowling Green, and hello to everyone on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I'm here with my wonderful co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, and Rebecca
very
Wood.
Very nearly awake.
Yes, we're grateful for that. Yes, and Rebecca and I are about to craft an incredible hour of radio called For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment. And we talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and your family, and the fish and the birds and the mammals and the bugs and the protista and the mycoplasms and basically everybody and everything, because, like it or not, all of us are here together on this beautiful planet called Earth. So we have a good show lined up for you today, meeting our usual high standards. We're going to chat for just another 10 minutes or so. And then we're going to hear an interview with Joshua Wright, who's going to talk to us about the situation out there. There's a fresh round of blockades out there in British Columbia on Victoria Island, where they're trying to save the last little remnants of old growth. Then we'll hear from our advertisers and patrons. And then, Rebecca, it will be your turn to take over the mic. And what are we going to be talking about?
We are going to be talking about environmental education in honor of World Teachers Day.
Ah, very nice. Then after that is ecological news, and hopefully at some point we're going to hear from this. And hopefully we're going to hear from you. Did I say this? This you,
you
the
did,
listener.
And I was like, where is he going with this?
Yes, so hopefully we're going to hear from you at 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007. And you can call and talk about any environmental topic that suits your fancy or that you've been curious about. And starting this week, we actually have a new way for you to get on to contact us. You can text during the show. You can text 419-973-5841. That's 419-973-5841. If you're somebody who's kind of microphone shy and you don't want to actually get on the air, you can text a comment and I'll read it on the line online here. And this is a good week to comment because something really big happened. Well, in that terms of Jane Goodall passing away. We're going to be talking about her in just a minute. But
actually, what did I call? What did I text you about last night, Joe?
Jane Goodall passing away.
Because she was in fact an environmental educator.
Aha! So that's like
it needed to be settled whether I was going to talk about it or you were.
Right. So it's like foreshadowing for
She educated me pretty good. I was. Did I tell you this story already? I was able to once get the gorilla in the Toledo Zoo to the silverback to symbolically share a a piece of sugar cane with me. He was chewing on with me by pressing it against the glass.
Oh.
Because I got down low and I didn't look him in the face, and I made sort of appropriate begging noises like this.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, he was like, okay, you're being good, you're asking correctly. I think you're crazy, lady, but here is your pretend sugar cane.
Well, that is so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at least one gorilla believes that you were raised right.
Right, yeah, I got
so-
good manners.
Good manners, gorilla manners. Okay, excellent. All right. I did want to talk though a little bit about what's going on. We'd like to talk a little bit about the weather here because I went to two really nice events yesterday, two outdoor events. One was the Wood County Park District's Fall Festival at the Carter Historic Farms, where they had people going around in 1920s and 1930s style garb, because that's what that farm is. It's a pre-World War II farm, and they use all the age-appropriate implements and so forth, and which is all pre-herbicides and pesticides. So it's kind of organic, just because it's before they started figuring out how to make all these poisons.
Right.
And they had food, and they had games, and they had displays. It was really nice, but it was also really hot.
That's when poisons were primarily around the house to get rid of rodents and or your husband in a pinch. So
Yeah.
there you go.
I guess that did happen a fair bit, yeah. But so it was really hot. That's the thing is, and then I went to another event, another little outdoor party, which was put on by Staten Middleton. Some of you may remember we had him on the show a few weeks ago, because he is somebody who has bought 28 acres and is restoring it to natural wetlands. And he spent a lot of time and money doing it. And so he had this nice little party. We had some music, and then people went out and gathered wildflower seeds, because it's very expensive to buy the wildflower seed mixes.
Wow.
So if you've got it, it's much cheaper to harvest it yourself, and then you've got that to spread the wildflowers even more, the native wildflowers. So, but it was hot there too.
Yep, I bet it was.
And it's not supposed to be this hot right now. In fact, today we're going to have high in the mid 80s here in Northwest Ohio, and that is roughly 18 degrees above average. You may remember last week we were 14 degrees above average, and we're having nights in the 40s and days in the 80s, and there's just no way that this is normal.
And I feel like it takes something away from your risque Halloween costume when there's no risk of being cold. It takes a little challenge out of it.
Right, and if you're
What is
getting
the
all
point?
sweaty,
Yeah, right.
even though you're wearing next to nothing,
Right.
That's also not.
We're going as a
Fun.
beach volleyball team because it's too hot for anything else.
Right, there you go. So yeah, we're well past the fall equinox, so the days are getting shorter, and the sun is getting lower and lower on the horizon, so it doesn't feel like it's supposed to be hot right now. And in fact, it's not. And of course, we also have our drought to contend with. This is the worst drought in a long time. People are comparing it to the 1988 drought, which I remember. I
remember the grass turned, like when you stepped on it, it crackled.
Yes.
It was wild.
And we're getting to that point now. And in fact, the leaves are supposed to be turning right now, and they're not really turning. They're more just sort of drying up and falling off.
Well, some of them started.
Yeah, they sort of started, and then it just stayed super dry, and now they're just
Poor old nature.
brown leaves everywhere. It's not we're not really getting the fall
I'm
colors.
seeing
this year.
violets too, which is odd. There's a new crop of violet, maybe because people are mowing their lawns less because they don't have to as much. But
So another crop of wildflowers. Yeah,
Yeah,
a lot
that
of
is
flowers
weird.
are trying another second thing, but it's just another example of the fact that global warming is real, and you could literally just go outside right now and feel it. And I think now to try to transition over to talk about Jane Goodall, Greta Thunberg was one of her, they were actually in connection with each other, and they communicated with each other. And of course, Greta's big thing has been global warming and fighting the whole global warming crisis. And Jane Goodall fought for the environment on a whole bunch of different fronts. I mean, she was one of the giants in the environmental movement. She got her fame, she started out, she got the world's attention way back in the 1960s, because that's when she went and started her studies with the chimpanzees of the Gombe in Tanzania. And what happened was that she'd always wanted to go to Africa and study wildlife. And so in 1960, she was sent out to Gombe by the Leakeys. They were studying primates because they're billed as our closest living relatives. And Richard Leakey sent, the Leakeys started out from an anthropology angle. They were looking at skeletons of other human races, other human species. And they decided we needed to study our closest living species. And so they sent people to stay with gorillas, that was Diane Fossey, and orangutans.
I should mention there's a great deal of chimpanzee hatred on YouTube right now, because when chimpanzees get upset with you, very, very bad things can happen.
Uh-huh.
But really, the scariest thing about chimpanzees is that they're too much like us. They're capable of so much tenderness and altruism, and also can be so terrifyingly vicious. They're too human is the problem.
Well, that's interesting, because I wanted to bring up the fact that she was sent to study chimpanzees.
Right.
And chimpanzees, aggression is a big part of their culture.
Right.
There's a lot of dominance. They have wars between chimpanzee bands where they'll go, all the young males will get together and they'll go literally just kill another band.
As opposed to, gorillas, really, you have to really alarm a gorilla before it will do anything. And then half the time it's just going to rush past you.
And as opposed to bonobos.
Right, bonobos.
Now, bonobos
are the hippies of the chimp world.
Literally, they just lived on the other side of the river from chimpanzees. And I've often wondered, what if Jane had gone to study bonobos?
Yeah, that would have been real interesting.
Because their culture is super cooperative.
Yes.
They don't do the whole competition. They don't try to dominate each other. In fact,
mostly because if a male tries, all the women in all the females in the tribe will give him something to remember.
Yeah, that's true. But mostly because they diffuse social tensions.
So mostly nobody even tries.
Yeah, with sex, actually.
Right.
That's how bonobos, if there's a conflict,
I saw a thing about baboons also that are especially certain species of baboons are very, very violent. But at one point, all the male baboons died out from this one troop, and they only had the little baby boy baboons.
Okay.
And the next generation turned out to be not violent, and also males coming into the tribe from outside also kind of followed the example of these nonviolent baboons. So all you got to do is raise one generation right, apparently.
Yeah, well, and it just shows how
primates have culture,
how important
like
culture
other
is.
animals. Yeah.
And so and so I often wondered, because I see Jane Goodall's studies and observations of chimpanzees. I see them being applied to us all the time in terms of the way there's domination is, of the male is kind of celebrated, and I see people acting the way the dominant male chimpanzees were recorded as acting. And I'm wondering how much of that is actually the result of people studying her work and saying, okay, well, if we want to be on top, we've got to do this with humans.
It's mostly about wolves, but the other thing is that even in primate cultures where there are dominant males, there also tends to be non-dominant males who've decided, well, you know what, I'm not going to be 1, 2, or 3, and I don't want to be, because that's a lot of blood loss. So what I'm going to do is kind of sneak over here and be friends with the lady primates here, the lady chimps or whatever, and give them little treats, help carry their children to safety. And what happens to these guys is they do pretty well with spreading their DNA, by this strategy. And they often get to grow old surrounded by their descendants, their little family.
Right. Yeah.
And whereas the dominant primates males tend to be driven out because nobody likes those guys.
They're jerks.
As soon as they get too old, everybody's like, "Okay, we put up with your crap long enough.
Yeah.
Bye."
Right.
And then they got to be out in the world, in these little bands together, all old and creaky, all with injuries from being beaten up on before they left,
Crotchety
and it's not a good
guys.
situation for
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. So anyway, my main point is that as humans, though, we can consciously choose: do we want to be more like chimpanzees, or do we want to be more like the bonobos?
Or the non-dominant chimpanzee males who are like, okay, I'm going to do this another way.
Well, the guys who basically sneak around and have little
You're
things
back
going
to a
on the
man.
side.
Yeah, chimpanzee.
I
type.
mean, we could choose that route
Yeah.
too. But I'm just saying, I think it would be better if we all decided to choose the cooperative model over
I'm thinking that
the
would be
competitive
good.
model.
Yeah, that would be good.
That's my point that I was trying to get to.
Yep.
So, all right, thank you. All right, well, anyway, just real quick on Jane, some more facts about her. She arrived in Gombe in 1960. In 1965, she earned her PhD by publishing the behavior of free-living chimpanzees in the Gombe Stream Reserve, which is sort of her big claim to academic fame, where she pointed out that chimpanzees use tools, which at that point, back in the 60s, we didn't think any other animal was smart enough to use a tool. She went on she was married twice. She had one son and 3 grandkids. She wrote 27 books. She made 2 huge IMAX movies. Her latest book, The Book of Hope, A Survival Guide for Trying Times, is currently being published. So if you're interested in that. She also founded the Jane Goodall Institute to support continued studies of chimpanzees, and that has expanded now. There's 25 offices of the Jane Goodall Institute around the world, and I got a lot of this information from their website, the Jane Goodall Institute.org. She also started an organization called Roots and Shoots in 1991, and that's a work going strong in 75 countries, and that is an organization that promotes young people getting into environmental activism. Right up till she died, and she died, on the podium. She traveled 300 days out of the year. That's pretty tough schedule for a 90-year-old. And in 2017, she founded the Jane Goodall Legacy Foundation. I actually met her once in Buffalo. She came to speak, and it was one of those situations where there was a little scheduling, whatever, and so she came to the venue, and we were there, a little group of us with her for like an hour before she was supposed to talk. And she was every bit as nice and as patient as she is in her interviews. As far as I could tell from meeting her, from being with her for like 3 or 4 hours in the morning, she really is as nice as she seemed to be. So it was a great thing meeting her. It was really nice. She had this air of peace about her. She was just very patient and peaceful, and it was cool. All right, so our tribute to Jane went on a little longer. It's not too late for you folks to join in if you want at 877-909-1007, or you can text 419-973-5841. But something that's not quite so nice and peaceful is going on out there over in British Columbia, and where they are, again, another timber company. We reported on this 2 weeks ago. Just got an injunction from a Canadian judge to break up this camp. It's called Cougar Camp, where they're trying to block clear cutting of another old growth grove. And so I managed to get an interview with Joshua Wright, who's been following these issues for a long time. So let's go to that issue now. Welcome back to For a Green Future. Please share with us your name and if you're with any organizations.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Joshua Wright, and I am generally an old growth activist and watchdog. doing a lot of volunteer work in British Columbia, and then also working in Alaska and generally the Pacific Northwest in Washington State.
Hmm. And the last time you were on, it was about 5 years ago, right? We were talking about the Fairy Creek encampment out there in British Columbia. Do you want to just give a little background on that?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think most people aren't aware of is that there are still old growth forests similar to the redwoods that are being cut down throughout the Pacific Northwest. In British Columbia, the government there authorizes the logging, British Columbia, Canada, the government authorizes the logging of somewhere around 100,000 acres of old growth forests every year. And these old growth forests have trees that are as tall as skyscrapers and are, 10 feet around or 10 feet wide. And these trees are often 1 or even 2,000 years old. And the timber industry targets these forests and has been targeting these forests for the past century. And we're at a point now where there's very little of these old growth forests left. And the industry is turning these trees, generally red cedar and yellow cedar, into decking for luxury housing and shingles for luxury housing, shakes and shingles.
Hmm.
So back in 2020, a group of activists set up a blockade of one of the last remaining intact watersheds on southern Vancouver Island called Fairy Creek. And in so doing, set off the largest act of civil disobedience in Canadian history. The logging road blockade lasted for about a year, and when all was said and done, about 1,200 people were arrested, which is more than have ever been arrested in any other single act of civil disobedience. And that got the government to somewhat come to the table and start talking and, saying the right things about old growth protection. But here we are 4 or 5 years later, and those protections haven't really come through. And now, partly because of the trade war, the government's leaning more and more into logging old growth because, in a large sense, the government actually gets a lot of their revenue in British Columbia from what are called stumpage fees, which is essentially the money paid to them when publicly owned trees are cut down. So that's led to today where there is another blockade, and history is kind of repeating itself here. There's another blockade in the Walbrand Valley now, and folks are blocking a old growth area from being logged by a company called Western Forest Products. And people have been out there, I think, for 5 or 6 weeks now, blocking roads.
Hmm. And they're at a place they call it Cougar Camp. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, so this camp was created with as I understand it, the an ask from an indigenous elder in the area. His name's Elder Bill Jones, and he's been a leader of protecting old growth forests for the past decade. And the camp is named after this big cougar structure that the activists erected in the middle of the logging road. It's made out of the sort of the remains of these old growth trees after they're cut down, salvaged from other areas that were recently logged. So it's a big, 10 or 15-foot tall sculpture of a cougar blocking the logging road. And now they've also, designed basically a drawbridge and like a barricade. And there's also a hunting cabin for Elder Bill up there. And I think folks' idea is that they want to hold space up there and keep the blockade going until the Walbrand Valley is protected. For context, this is one of the most precious watersheds on southern Vancouver Island because the lower part of it was subject of a battle back in the 1990s where part of it got protected. But what ended up happening was the upper two-thirds of the valley sort of were given to the timber beast, and there's been a long movement to get that middle third protected. But in the meantime, this upper watershed area where the blockade is has just been ravaged by industry. And this is really what's happening across British Columbia. It's sort of the representative example. It's close to a lot of people's hearts, but it is the same story in many many hundreds of valleys across the province.
Hmm. Yeah, I've seen pictures of that cougar sculpture. It's actually incredibly beautiful. And like you say, it's huge. It's probably 15 feet is about right for the height. And it's made from slash, right? Which is what loggers call the leftovers. And actually slash represents a danger to the forest, doesn't it? I mean, once you've cut these big trees and you leave all the loose branches and extra, quote unquote, extra wood laying around, um, doesn't that uh, present a danger to the forest?
It really depends. Oftentimes waste wood, or what is called waste wood, is good um for small mammals and for fungus and sort of microorganisms that live on dead woods. So sometimes it's actually good that that stuff left there in one sense, but in the other sense, what'll happen is you'll have the industry only pay for the best trees. So they'll clear cut an entire forest and they'll take, let's just be generous and say they'll take half of the trees that they could take. um, they will pay stumpage on the biggest, best, oldest, nicest wood, and they will essentially throw perfectly good trees away and go log another area. And essentially, when you take a cubic meter of really nice old growth cedar out of a cut block, you might have to pay $50 or $100 in stumpage to the government. Um, but if you leave a cubic meter of, less valuable wood in the cut block, all you need to do is pay 25 cents as a waste fee. So what this incentivizes is a system where the companies logging old growth will mow down old growth forests, take the very best trees, pay for those ones, and then pay basically waste on the rest of it. So then they will go to the government and say, we don't have enough trees, even though they left half of what they cut down in the cut block, oftentimes, because that wasn't the most valuable wood. And they are, after profits. They're not after, being the best stewards of the land possible. I would hope that if you're clear cutting a forest, that you utilize as much as you can possibly utilize so you can minimize the amount of forest that you're clear cutting. But that's sort of the exact opposite of what's happening out there. And it's really important that folks in the US understand this and know this because the US is the major consumer of timber from Canada. And, as I said earlier, it's timber that is going to, decking. So if you see yellow cedar or red cedar, I can guarantee you it came from a 500,000-year-old forest in British Columbia, nine times out of 10. And I think as consumers in the US, people need to be conscious of where that stuff comes from because we are the market. And luckily, we have, for now, a bit better environmental regulations in the States. But, in British Columbia, that's being done because of the demand created by predominantly the lower 48.
Hmm. Yeah, I did want to ask you about something else in terms of the US. You mentioned that we have better regulations here, some better regulations, and I'm gonna ask you a little bit about the move to repeal the roadless rule. But in our conversation setting up this interview, you mentioned that a wonderful organization that has had a lot of influence and a lot to do with the fact that we are protecting some of our old growth. The Rainforest Flying Squad has disbanded. Could you tell me a little bit about the Rainforest Flying Squad and why it's gone now?
Yeah, so the Rainforest Flying Squad was never a real organization. It was um, a loose network of activists who were organizing the Fairy Creek blockade, and it was sort of a name given to the movement. That name has become a little bit, I guess, uh, out of fashion because it was named as a defendant by Teal Jones. So the company that is logging in Fairy Creek, or that was trying to log Fairy Creek, and in the surrounding areas back in 2021, they're the Teal Jones Group, and they are a multinational company that decided to issue slap suits against land defenders. So I was one of the people named on that lawsuit, and they allege a criminal conspiracy where the Rainforest Flying Squad was trying to cost them business, which is of course pretty absurd. The blockade was you know it was a mass movement. It's like blaming an individual person for Occupy Wall Street. It's like, but
Mhm.
that's sort of
Right.
akin to what they're doing, and they're doing that to try to silence outspoken people who have been critical of them and who have been clear that people can exercise their rights to non-violent civil disobedience. That isn't a crime. Um, but they filed this lawsuit against 15 folks who are involved in Fairy Creek in general. Even people such as myself who have never, you know, we the worst I've done is said bad things about Teal Jones. Not specifically because they're Teal Jones, but because they are currently logging old growth forests. And I've been, critical of Western Forest Products and, Interfor and a number of other companies doing the same thing. But they're basically saying that these interests want to destroy Teal Jones' business and filed that. It's a lawsuit basically aiming to discourage public participation and scare people um, who would be willing to speak out with this notion that they might have to pay damages for perceived reputational damage on the part of this company. Now the Teal Jones Group is actually going through bankruptcy proceedings, so we've kind of not heard back from their lawyers in a while because they have a court-appointed monitor who is tasked with making sure they only spend money on things that are actually necessary, and frivolous lawsuits that are designed to silence activists aren't, strictly speaking, necessary. So
Hmm.
I'm personally not too worried about it, but that's kind of um, the lawsuit actually alleges that RFS was a organization that had, like had employees and was some sort of group. RFS was a loose name for a movement that had thousands and thousands of people involved.
Hmm.
So I think that's why that folks don't necessarily talk about RFS.
Right.
Um, but yeah.
And that is very similar. We've had on our show the lead lawyer for the for Greenpeace that's also facing a slap, strategic lawsuit against public participation lawsuit for their participation in the Dakota Access Pipeline fight. Yeah. So it does seem to be a sort of an industry-wide strategy to be. So it's kind of like they're the ones sort of participating in a criminal conspiracy in that they probably got together somewhere and plotted this idea out that they're going to do these strategic lawsuits that are designed to prevent people from speaking out and basically saying the truth. And one other thing about the thing 5 years ago about Fairy Creek was that the spontaneous um, support, as you say, from all over Canada. People were protesting all over the country that had nothing to do with and no contact with the people in the camps beyond the public information that was being reported in the media. Uh, and so that kind of brings me to what I wanted to ask you a little bit about this this idea that the Trump administration is going to repeal the roadless rule in the United States, which basically a rule that says if a piece of wilderness has never had a road through it, you can't build a road through it, that it basically has to stay pristine so that logging companies and mining companies can't get in there and destroy it. Um, are you aware that there was just there was a public comment period on this. They had an abbreviated 21-day comment. And then there was an organization that analyzed the public comments and discovered 99.2% of Americans oppose eliminating the roadless rule. Did you know that? And does that surprise you?
Yeah, I did know that, and I believe that's 600,000 comments. I mean,
Hmm.
the reason that the Trump administration would want to repeal the roadless rule is pretty obvious. They want to log in wilderness areas. And I think one of the really pernicious things is that they're making it sound like they need to do it for wildfire or they need to do it for forest health. And I really recommend people read this book. It's by Chad Hansen, who is a PhD in ecology. And he actually studies wildfires and their ecological role. And he has a book called Smokescreen by Chad Hansen. And it talks about the industry's attempt to use wildfire as a Trojan horse, essentially, to increase logging on public lands. And I think the roadless rule is very tied into that. But yeah, I mean, in with the repeal of the roadless rule, we're it's a giveaway to timber companies. The Forest Service generally doesn't make a profit from a lot of their timber sales program because it's so expensive. Like, it's a taxpayer subsidy to these logging companies. And despite it making really no economic sense, I think the Trump administration just wants to develop for the sake of development. It's like in Alaska, what you'll see is so-called roads to nowhere that the Congress will fund these projects just to do something. And Similarly, I think that they're aiming to start logging as much as they can wherever they can. And, because Doge ended up firing so many Forest Service employees, I think a lot of people are actually kind of skeptical as to their ability to execute on some of these really horrible timber sales. But we certainly have to brace ourselves for more logging and potentially old growth logging and potentially road building into wilderness, areas of roadless wilderness, especially I worry about the Clearwater National Forest in Idaho and especially the Tongass National Forest in Southeast Alaska, where last time they were trying to repeal the roadless rule, they were going to be logging tens of thousands of acres of old growth forests up there. I think that as this sort of civil disobedience happens in Canada, people should be prepared for the same thing happening in the lower 48 if it gets to that place where the Trump administration is trying to build roads into, intact old growth watersheds.
Hmm. Well, and of course, the head of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was a timber lobbyist. That was his profession. Um, the ironic thing, of course, is that old growth, because it's so much better at retaining water, is actually less, undisturbed old growth is less vulnerable to forest fires than these young forests that have slash laying in the grounds and thin young trees that are coming up there are much more easily flammable. So,
And one of the important things to note about wildfire too is that really bad wildfires like we see in the West that are, 10,000 acres, 100,000 acres. First of all, those are actually normal and natural to have some of those on the landscape sometimes, but they have nothing to do with fuel loads. You'll have this narrative that there's too much fuel in the forest, when in reality it's almost entirely about wind-driven events. So it's about weather conditions, and climate change is making hot, dry conditions with high winds more and more frequent. And because we have more and more roads, specifically actually in national forests and public access is, compared to what we had historically, because we have a lot more roads today, that's a lot more people camping, that's a lot more potential sources of ignition. So the idea that you're going to repeal the roadless rule and build more roads to combat wildfire just entirely misunderstands how wildfires start. And it also in fact would cause worse wildfires because you're going to log an area, which opens the stand up to being drier, and wind will go right through a stand if it's, if there are a lot fewer trees in that stand. And more importantly, you'll have a lot more people using those roads and a lot more potential sources of ignition in the hot, dry months, which will cause more catastrophic wildfires. So the entire industry framing of this whole thing is really Orwellian. It's exactly the opposite of what's true.
all right. So just touching back on Cougar Camp, um, as you say, kind of repeat things happening over again. A Canadian court just issued an injunction that says that the RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, can go in there and break up the camp. And I guess the people there are kind of bracing themselves for that. A lot of them have been through it before, right? So what is the status with that?
Yeah, I think folks are just sort of waiting. So far, nothing has happened, and so far, I think people want to keep holding space in the forest and standing up for the trees. Nobody's there to break the law. Everybody's there to stand up for something that's been promised for a long time. The NDP government, the New Democratic Party in British Columbia, they got elected in 2017 promising to protect old growth. And here we are almost 10 years later, and they're still clear cutting old growth forests. And they've had report after report saying what they should do, saying what they should protect. They've had, all of these different processes, and they just keep logging in the meantime, run out the clock.
The government has even officially agreed with some of those reports, right? And
Oh
promised.
yeah, the government accepts that old growth forests are at risk, but they abdicate their responsibility to do anything about it because I think there's a big lobby from the Truck Loggers Association, like the some of the steel workers unions, which represent loggers, and from the industry, which I think has the governing class in British Columbia in their pocket, unfortunately.
Mm.
And it's funny, the progressive parties will always run on a platform of not extraction, of no extraction, no pipelines, no logging, no new dams, and then they get in and then they do a 180 and then they start doing all those things. So
Mm.
as long as that happens, I think that you're going to have people standing up until there's literally no more old growth left unprotected. It's going to be we're at a situation where they're going to keep logging and people are going to keep protesting until something changes. I would encourage people to like not buy yellow cedar or red cedar lumber. You can look up, the Fairy Creek Blockade Instagram account has updates on the situation out there. And then I would encourage you to get involved in local forest protection organizations to learn more. Read Smokescreen by Chad Hansen. I think that's really relevant to what's happening in the US. And yeah, fight for what you love. Fight for the forest.
Here we go. So that was our interview with Joshua Wright. And what did you think? Give us a call, 877-909-1007, or send us a text, 419-973-5841. Okay, so we're back on the air with a better mic, hopefully. And we are also on the air thanks to our patrons and sponsors. Foregreen Future is brought to you by the Wood County Park District. Imagine a place where nature meets adventure, where you can climb, paddle, fish, and explore. That place, it's right here in Wood County. The Wood County Park District is here to protect, preserve, and inspire. We conserve natural and cultural treasures so you can enjoy the outdoors like never before by maintaining green spaces, providing fun programs, restoring wildlife habitats, and leading outdoor adventures. Want to connect with nature? Try your hand at archery, bouldering, geocaching, paddling, rappelling, and more. Whether you're seeking adventure or a peaceful retreat, our parks are open every day from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset all year round. Come explore, get outside, experience nature. Your parks, your adventures waiting for you. Find us online at wcparks.org or follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or X, or call 419-353-1897. The Wood County Park District, preserving nature, creating adventure, and inspiring a greener future.
Expiring?
Inspiring.
Inspiring, okay.
Yeah, not did I say expiring?
It sounded a little bit like it to me.
All right, no. Inspiring.
Okay.
A greener future.
That's not what we want them to do.
Thank you for catching that.
Yeah.
All right. We are also brought to you by our patrons. Our patrons are fantastic people who've gone to patreon.com. There they searched for For a Green Future. Up popped our Patreon page. They scrolled through looking at our cool photos, and then they chose a level membership that matched their own budget. Every month now, a little bit comes out of their accounts, comes over to us, and that's how we can afford to keep this show on the air. So thank you to our patrons. Okay, Rebecca, your turn at the mic.
Okie dokie. Well, tomorrow, Monday the 6th, for people in Toledo, which will be the past for people who are hearing this on Saturday. Anyway, Monday the 6th is World Teachers Day. So I thought I would talk about the profession of being an environmental educator for a while. The profession of environmental education specializes in teaching the scientific study of how organisms interact with their environment and fosters an understanding of ecological principles such as biodiversity, energy flow, ecosystem dynamics, and so forth, using classroom instruction, fieldwork, and immersive outdoor experiences to equip students with eco-literacy. A little bit like I try to do on the show sometimes.
Yes.
on a micro level. So they do this in schools and universities, nature centers and reserves, museum and science centers, and nonprofit organizations. And let me see, according to s.community.kaplan.org, they like for you to have a degree in ecology or environmental science or something similar, plus a teaching credential. And most employers like it if you're pursuing a master's degree also. So yeah, and one of these people who did not have those credentials or lived before there was such thing as a science center, I think, was Aldous Leopold, ecological teacher. He lived from 1887 to 1948. And the reason that stuff didn't exist in his time is because he kind of invented some of it. He's known as the father of wildlife ecology. He was a professor at University of Wisconsin, as well as having a long career in the Forest Service. And he wrote a book posthumously published called A Sand County Almanac, which has been printed 2 million copies have been printed in 14 languages of this thing. And it's educated and influenced a lot of people and has become an environmental classic. It's known as. Aldous Leopold was born in Idaho, where his dad used to take him and his siblings out in the woods, to look at things and find out what they were called and whatnot, kind of like my Grandpa Wood did with my dad. And he was a writer, philosopher, naturalist and scientist, ecologist, forester, conservationist, and environmentalist. He was educated at Yale, and he was influential in developing modern environmental ethics. Also, he was the founder of the Science of Wildlife Management and wrote Forest Service handbooks on managing fish and game. And also, he went on speaking tours, I think, promoting ecology, getting people to support ecology. And also sort of talked about eco watersheds and managing watersheds. So as our zinger fact, his parents were in fact cousins, first cousins, which is not that uncommon in those days.
Really?
But yeah, apparently he turned out okay anyway.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder if I think probably Jane Goodall read a Sand County Almanac. I'm pretty sure she did. It probably helped inspire her.
Makes sense.
Into her life of eco-consciousness.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you, Rebecca. Aldous Leopold.
Yep.
All right. On to ecological news. And our first story, unfortunately, is a bad one. In 2023, we celebrated along with New York State because they passed a law. They convinced Governor Hochul to sign it called the Save the Hudson Act, which was a state law that prevented any kind of radioactive waste from being dumped into the Hudson River, which makes a lot of sense because, millions of people live along that river. And every bit of radiation hurts the environment and hurts people. And actually, since they passed it, there's been this bloom of wildlife coming back into the Hudson, including dolphins.
Nice. Oh my God, dolphins.
Dolphins, yeah.
Dolphins.
For the first time in many, many decades,
wow.
There's dolphins in the Hudson River right after they banned any kind of radioactive pollution. So
interesting.
But unfortunately, what just happened this past week, a federal judge, his name is Ken Karras, U.S. District Judge, overturned the law.
Oh, great.
It said, oh, no, the state can't regulate something like radiation within their borders.
Why not?
Because they said, but that's the job of the federal government. So you can't pass a state law that protects anybody. You can only
says who?
Says Ken Karras.
Okay, whatever. Ken Karras.
The super terrible judge who has no clue about actual law or basically protecting humans, because that's ultimately what this is about. Is people in New York State said stop dumping radiation on us, but Ken Karras said no, go ahead, dump it. Of course, the suit was brought by
the Prince.
Was brought by the evil Holtec Corporation.
Oh God, Holtec again.
Yes, Holtec, and they were complaining because they weren't able to dump tens of thousands of gallons of radioactive water from the Indian Point nuclear plant that got closed in 2021. They've been holding it, and the thing about tritium contaminated water is all you have to do is hold it for 100 years, and it's no longer radioactive, and then you can dump it. It's clean, but that costs money. And so they want to just dump it into the river because that's cheaper. And thanks to Ken Karras, it looks like they're going to get to do it. It was interesting. I only found counter arguments. I only found people who had negative comments about this in all the local media, like the Mid-Hudson News and Rockland County News. And the people who live near Indian Point are very, very upset about this and opposed to it. In fact, the Rockland County Legislature's Environmental Committee Chair, Beth Davidson, said this is reckless, dangerous, and an insult to every Hudson Valley family.
Basically.
But unfortunately, Governor Hochul, she signed the bill back in 2023, but now she's been seduced by the nuclear industry. She's drunk the radioactive Kool-Aid. And even though all the local people are calling on her administration to appeal this, it's not at all clear she's just going to let it happen, because now she's got all these rich new friends in the nuclear industry that she just loves. And
great.
And they're just telling her, just let us dump it. It's good. Unfortunately, our governor here in Ohio also has drunk the radioactive Kool-Aid. Governor DeWine on September 25th, and we're getting most of the information from this off of the state website. He had a press conference because the Centrus Corporation down there in Portsmouth, Ohio, is ramping up production of enriched uranium. And they're claiming it's going to create 300 jobs, and they've already issued $1.2 billion in bonds. Actually 300 jobs for $1.2 billion does not seem like that good a deal, right?
Not really. Does local McDonald have 300 people working there?
Yeah, a couple. Yeah, just the local fast food restaurants.
Why don't they just open a McDonald's?
Yeah.
Well, they don't have to do that, but
Now they had this big press conference where they reveled in the idea they're going to create more radiation, more radioactive pollution, but this is all dependent on Department of Energy grants, because the nuclear industry cannot afford to pay for its own fuel anymore. Right now, the government, through the Portsmouth production, is literally giving them the fuel they need. Because otherwise, they literally can't afford to buy it. Now, most of the enriched fuel we buy now comes from Russia, which
great. That's great.
We've been continuing to do despite the Ukraine war. I mean, we cut off their imports of natural gas, but we've kept buying billions of dollars worth of enriched uranium. So we're funding the Ukraine war with our nuclear industry right now.
So the rule is basically don't buy anything from Russia unless you really wanna. Unless you really wanna.
Unless it's radioactive.
Right.
If it's radioactive,
right. Okay.
Go ahead and give Russia money for it. So
we're kind of funding both sides, in fact.
Yeah, we are. We literally are.
Thanks
to this. And Lieutenant Governor Jim Tressel spoke at this conference, and he said America is becoming more reliant on nuclear energy. And that is absolutely false. We are becoming more reliant on wind and solar. They're becoming a larger and larger percentage of our production, whereas nuclear power is fading. We are losing plant after plant. We're building a couple new ones here and there, but we're losing faster than we're gaining. And so the percentage that nukes are supplying is dropping, while the percentage of wind and solar are supplying is increasing. So great big fat lie there from Lieutenant Governor Jim Tressel. And to support this assertion, next story is Belgium. Off to Belgium because they closed another nuke plant. This was actually in World Nuclear News on October 1st, which, whenever I hear a nuke plant close, I have a day of unbridled joy. And I really needed a day of unbridled joy, let me tell you. The Tihange nuclear plant was running for 50 years, and it is now disconnected from the grid, and they have begun removing the fuel already. 3 other reactors have already shut down. This is all part of a nuclear phase-out policy that the government passed in 2003. Now, this past May 2025, the legislature in Belgium has reversed that law. They threw out the law. The problem for them is that nuclear power is not at all economically feasible. And so the company, Engie, which owns the nuke plants, is going ahead with the phase out, even though the government has sent them a letter saying, please stop decommissioning your nuke plants. Engie is saying no because they're losing money on them because they are economically suicidal.
Wow.
And plus, also, what's another thing happening in Europe is the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, for the 10th time, has lost all external power and is running solely on backup generators. And if those go down, which they might, thanks to a drone strike or something, or cut off of diesel fuel, then they will have a massive meltdown. And so, because I think part of what's going on is a lot of people in Europe are realizing that every country with a nuclear power plant has given their enemy a nuclear weapon. That might be part of what in the back of Engie's mind when they've decided to go through with their nuclear phase out. So good on Engie.
Somebody told me on Facebook that Poland is getting more involved with the Ukraine-Russia war or something, or some war.
Russia keeps provoking them by violating their airspace. And
All right.
yeah. Okay, next story. And here's a happy story. Electrek with a K.co, the Energy Information Agency, that's the U.S. Energy Information Agency, EIA, solar and wind crush coal with 20% more power in 2025. And basically they looked at July 2025, compared that to July 2024. Solar power generation is up 30%, wind power generation up 14%. Most of that was utility scale solar, that's up 37%, although rooftop solar did increase 13%. But together they solar put out 54% more power than hydro. Solar actually passed wind this year. Wait, it didn't come out quite right.
It did. Metaphorically pass wind. In fact, it took a giant dump.
Solar generated more electricity than wind for the first time in July of 2025. 4% more, okay. Which means that wind made 11% of all U.S. electricity. That's up 3.5% from 2025. Wind and solar together produced 20% of the U.S.'s electricity power. That's up 18% from 2024. Nuclear power, again, it's pointing out Governor Jim Tressel's lie. Nukes actually dropped 1% from 2024. Wind and solar 20% more than coal, just crushed coal, and 14% more than nukes. So wind and solar are on the way, and we are foolish, and Governor DeWine is foolish, and Governor Hochul is foolish, President Trump is foolish to get in the way of the clean energy revolution that is happening as we speak.
Yes, three bubbers.
Well, that's it for this show. Ran out of time, got a few more stories. We'll get to them next week. Thank you so much for listening. This is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
And we are signing off.
I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!